Hello, my name is Paolo. I'm from the Scottish Socialist Party. I wanted to ask a question to Jonathan. I was listening to you quite rightly talking about the Scottish Left project and the need. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, sorry. I was quite interested in your talk about the Scottish Left project. I do believe that after the last 2 years, and especially given the crisis the Labour Party is on, we need in Scotland a united left on the model of Syriza or Podemos in Spain. But I do believe that any discussion of this gen should start from the acknowledgement that over the last 2 years, or the referendum campaign, the Scottish Socialist Party has been the left wing, the radical wing of the referendum campaign. Our co-spokesperson, Colin Fox, was sitting on the advisory board of Yes Scotland. We have campaigned alongside our friends and comrades in the radical independence campaign, going out in schemes in Edinburgh and other parts of Scotland.
Could you bring it to a question, please? Thanks.
So my question was, when those talks are going to start, are you acknowledging the fact that the SSP needs to be part of it?
Can we keep to questions? Try and keep it to questions. Obviously, some points need to be made to back that up. But yes,
okay.
Maggie.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Maggie Chapman, co-convener of the Scottish Greens. I suppose following on from Paolo's question, one of the things that struck me was the strength of the movement of the radical independence campaign, bringing together people from across the political spectrum on the left, certainly. And I guess I'm interested to hear from all of you what you see the role of political parties is in building this left alliance that we're talking about, and particularly perhaps given that the Scottish Greens are in a position in Holyrood to build on that. What can we do to support and to help that?
Okay.
What you described about a superseding, all the conversations I had in London, people said, what would you replace the House of Lords with? You just described it. We don't need a House of Lords which has any form of appointment in it. We can have a participatory system in which the revising chamber, the people who watch government, are the people. We have all the technologies, the understandings, the methods to do this just now. That would be really scary to Westminster. They like being watched by people they appoint. They don't like being watched by people they govern. And if we can do that, it would be a great thing. I'd love to talk for ages. One of the things that we've really screwed up in Britain is the diversity of ownership model for enterprise generally, and I use the phrase, we need to get cooperatives working again. It is crazy we don't have more of them. We need to be actively stimulating them. We have to be building them, but we need to have a variety of models. Cooperative are great for some things. Social enterprise are great for some things. I'm not against private businesses. They do good things. There are ways to do private business which are effective and helpful, especially in local economies. And we need to do national scale things. We need to find new models of national industries as well. So yeah, I mean, I think this is a really important, and we're going to do quite a bit of work in that. And I'm going to conflate the two questions into one, which is, there's so much to do post-referendum, an enormous amount. And I'm just going to put my hand up and say that I decided that what I was going to try and do was get people together with big sticks to bash people who are in politics around and trying to get them to do good things, not jump on at the other side and get bashed over the head with the stick myself. So I was kind of watching all of that process more to see what was going to happen rather than with any fixed personal view at the outset as to what the outcome was going to be. And a day or two, I mean, I phoned Jonathan the day after the referendum, and we talked about this stuff, and I mean, most of the conversation went with me going, and we'll know in 2 or 3 days what's going on. And what my general view with this is, at each given moment right now, we need to be both idealistic in where we go and cynical in how we get there. And my view was that if that's how gravity falls, and gravity fell everybody into the SNP and the Greens, and quite a few in the SSP, but coming from a lower base, if that's where people ended up, that's what we work with. Now, I suspect what you will find, because it's inevitable, I bumped into a woman in the mosque kitchen just at Christmas there, and she just came up, she'd seen me talking at something, she came up for a blether, and after a long conversation in which she actually bitched about the SNP for almost the whole time, she turned around and said, of course I joined. And I said, why? She said, well, I had to do something. And that sense, I mean, I think a large number of people who joined the SNP, they're in there to do something. The SNP, and it's no blame on the SNP, they will let some of these people down. Some of these people I know are going to be let down by whatever they join. And bluntly, a big political party like that is going to let people down. There's always compromise. And what I think we have to do is work at each stage with what is there. So it was sad for me that we didn't get a formal electoral pact for Westminster. I didn't think we would, but it was sad that it never happened, so that's where we are. Probably, sorry Maggie, probably I can't see where the Greens are going to win, so we have to throw it behind the SNP. That's not the same for Holyrood. And one of the things that I think we need to start thinking about now is gaming the system. If we get from here to 2016 with SNCP support like it is, it's going to wipe out the first past the post seats, which for any of you who don't know means we're going to leave all the list seats to Labour. So let's not leave the list seats to Labour. How do we make sure that we pack the second vote in a way that maximises the number of progressive politicians that are coming in? That's what I think is going to happen in 2016. The left parties, you're talking. You need to work out what's going to happen. The SSP is there, and I mean, I said to a lot of people, look, the SSP is there, calling it a good referendum, that's where you start. So you need to talk and work out what that becomes. But again, for me, the gravity hasn't congealed that into something yet. It will, but it's not there yet. My guess is by the time we get to 2020, we will have a more balanced movement. I think that we drift away from the SNP, there'll be undoubtedly drift towards the Greens. By this point, I suspect you'll start to see an organised party of the left there as well, and the gravity will change things again. And that means that probably the 2020 election, it will look quite different. So, in effect, I'm just copping out completely and saying things will happen. What I'm interested in is what we do with the things that happen. And I know that Jonathan and others are trying to make certain things happen, and I think that's great. And as soon as they do, that's another resource for us to use.
Okay, on the first question, which is about the SSP, I mean, I completely agree. I mean, you can't talk about some kind of coalition of the left without talking about the SSP. But equally, my view is that we can't also say that the solution currently exists in any of the existing organisations of the Scottish left, because it doesn't. If the ambition is to win some MSPs, that's one thing, but if the ambition is to actually recalibrate how Scottish politics works in terms of the radical left, in terms of replacing the Labour Party, of being serious in the working class heartlands of Scotland from a radical left perspective, then it does mean that we've got to talk. Now, my basic view is this, that we are not in a position, and I think everyone accepts this, to just click our fingers and say, OK, we've got a new party of the left. However, I think that while there are specific circumstances in Greece, that Syriza does offer some possibilities for how we might proceed. I mean, I think actually the question of some kind of electoral coalition of the radical left in Scotland would be a hugely appealing thing to lots and lots of people, but it would also give those who are not convinced that any of the current organisations are in and of themselves going to be able to actually replace the Labour Party, then it gives an opening, I think, to that kind of discussion to take place. But of course, that's only one half of the argument. I think the main thing that we also have to sort of bear in mind here is what Maggie's talking about, which is what is the relationship between the existing broad left in Scotland and the possibility of driving a movement which is a left-wing movement through which you can have these types of discussions, but that there is an orientation between party and movement. Because that's what they've got right in Spain. That's what they've got right in Greece to an extent, although the situation now is complex, shall we say. However, the point of the matter is that the way that these kind of organisations were able to become organised is because they realised the opportunity in the situation and they recognised that the availability of the political resources was there. And if you look at 2016, we do have a situation where, at the end of the day, Robin's absolutely right. The SNP, of course, we're not talking about first votes here, we're talking about second votes. I think that opens opportunities. The last thing I'll say is basically this. You know, there are successful political organisations of the left. If you look at the Scottish Greens, for example, going to get MSPs, growing in membership, okay? That's the situation. I think actually we have to look at it like this. Can we get to a stage where, at 2016, the socialist left, which is not in the Green Party at this point in time, can get our act together, can present credibly, can potentially win a couple of seats, which gives us time and space between 2016 and 2020 to seriously think, because I know this isn't done overnight, to seriously think about a grand coalition of the radical left, which can fundamentally alter the course and the nature of Scottish politics. Okay, now that's one opinion of many opinions, probably all kinds of disagreements about it. All I'm simply saying is that we do actually have to start thinking about this, because we can end up in a situation where we lose and miss the opportunity. I mean, I'm thinking that there's another financial crisis coming. There's a question of the independence referendum recurring. There's all these kinds of things. If we get things right, it does mean that in the next 10 to 15 years, we can be in a situation where actually our politics dominate not just the hearts and minds of people's ideas and ideals, but actually politically, in the government, in the parliament, begin to express themselves in a very concrete and systematic manner. And I think that's something that we can all be part of.
I agree with both the other speakers, so I'm not going to say too much. But I think the first point that was made is extremely important. And here, again, Scotland could be a good model, which is to have the second chamber consisting of citizens. A citizens' chamber, not a chamber of lords. I mean, during the 17th century, when the English chopped off the head of their monarch, probably the most progressive thing they've ever done. The House of Lords was abolished. Let's not forget that, so that there is a very clear precedent. And having citizens renewable, who are replaced regularly so they don't get stuck in that position either once a year or once every 2 years, and you could even elect them, as was said, like juries are selected, by a lottery. That would educate a lot of people. And on the question of a new movement of the left, I think Jonathan is absolutely right. It has to be non-exclusive. That's the key thing to understand the successes of some of the movements in Europe. We have to just get away from the idea of trying to think how a sect can be created more creatively. It can't. There is a mentality of a sect which affects everyone, its tiny group of leaders and its tiny group of members. And I think we should have learned the lesson by now, even in Scotland, that that way of doing things doesn't work. We've got to get away from it, and that the organizations we create have to reflect, not in every way, but in some way, the society we're trying to create as well.
Thank you. So 3 more questions, starting over here.
Hello, my name is Mike. I'm a member of the Green Party. We've talked quite a lot tonight about opposition, and so I'd like to ask a question about that. Sorry, muttering. We don't seem to know who our enemy is quite a lot of the time. I'm a socialist. I'm part of the socialist left that, if you believe what Jonathan just said, is not in the Green Party, and I assure you I am. So my enemy is capital and the capitalist class, wherever it is. I think that's probably true of quite a lot of people in this room as well. But we also talk about the enemy as if it is Westminster, in inverted commas, Not entirely sure exactly what that means. We also talk about the enemy quite often, especially recently, as the Labour Party. The Common Weal book, at least, quite often talks about the enemy being like me-first politics, which sort of implies that the enemy is like a culture amongst all of us, rather than a particular group of people. So my question is quite simple. So who do you think our enemy is?
There's a woman just 2 rows in front of you that had a hand up.
Thanks. I'm Sarah. I'm from Women for Independence. I wondered what the panel felt, and indeed what they would like to do about the new proposals for identity cards in Scotland by the Scottish Government.
There's 2 people right at the back, but if we perhaps take you in the next round? Yeah, sorry. There's someone else right here. Yeah, thanks.
One for Robin, one for Jonathan. Robin, we were talking at Area C Commons the other night about the French citizens' audit of the national debt. Do we have the facilities within Common Weal to pursue something like that? Because I think they identified something like 60% of the existing public debt is not legitimate. And to Jonathan, what do we do about the trade unions that are still sort of paying obeisance to the Labour Party as if it were still a party of the working people? I know that I won't mention, my own union just releases things that sound like they were written by Ed Miliband, and it's very frustrating. So, sorry, I probably shouldn't have said that, but I have.
Jamie, could the mic head right to the back with those 2 gentlemen there? So there's 3 now. Okay. Whichever order.
Just quickly. First of all, just in terms of what you were saying, Mike, just let me be absolutely clear. Some of the best socialists I know are in the Green Party. That wasn't what I was saying. What I was saying was that there are lots of socialists who are not in the Green Party, and there is a reason for that. And there are lots of trade union members and lots of people who are community activists who have the same kind of view. My point is to say that none of the existing organisations, in my view, as it currently stands, in terms of the long-term trajectory of both the Labour Party and its erosion with the working class, can actually replace it, and replace it from the left. I think that means, all I'm saying is that we have to kind of open up that discussion and see where it gets us. But we have to be, at the same time as that, I mean, we've been working for a long time together throughout the independence movement, and I think what Maggie says is vitally important. The movement is the lifeblood of social transformation anyway, and I think that is really my answer to the question about who the enemy is. The enemy, well, on the one hand, it's the system, as the system operates. On the other hand, it's how do you get to a situation where there's some kind of confrontation with the system itself. We have to start, in my view, with the political. And the political question, which everyone is asking just now, in my view, is about democracy. And it's about control of having some control of your own life. Whether it's in your local community or whether it's to the national question of Westminster and how alienated people feel from it. The thing that is capturing people's ideas just now is giving some element of control, some element of some coordinates to your life. That's what's brilliant about the Common Weal model, where Robbins basically said at the start, use Common Weal as an excuse to actually go out and do stuff. It gives people some kind of control over what we want to do. I think we did the same type of thing in Radical Independence, where local groups had autonomy, where you said, you you don't need to ask permission from anyone to go and put on a meeting. You decide who's on the panel, as long as it's within the parameters of what we're arguing for, So that's my answer to that. But I just want to reiterate, I'm not for any stretch of the imagination saying that there are not socialists in the Green Party. As I say, some of the best socialists I know are in the Green Party. I just want to underline that. But I think you get the generality of what I'm saying about the trajectory for some kind of left alternative.
I'm not going to talk about enemy for too long, because it is one of the things that I think about more than anything else, because I'm a political strategist, and it is unfortunately true that populism in its proper sense, so everybody in politics uses the word populism as if the root word is popular, so it usually means cheap popular things. That's not what populism means at all. Populism comes from the root word populace. Populism means to manage a society, to manage a community, by dividing it into a big bit and a small bit and making the big bit hate the small bit. That's what populism literally means, and it's incredibly effective. Just look at what's happened with immigration in the UK. That's populism as first order. It's very effective. Now, it's also incredibly corrosive, and this is the thing. how do you adapt its effectiveness while avoiding its corrosiveness? Now, we have a Commonweal model which we use, which is we talk about it as if it's not people. And that's quite important for me. And I quite often say things like, you can hardly blame the chief executive of a big corporation for gaming tax if his shareholders demand it and we allow it through the tax system. And so to try to depersonalise it, personalise the enemies is when things go wrong. As much as possible, if the enemy can be depersonalised, which is not to say that you can't drill down and you can say, then again, that chief executive lobbied for those tax laws, so we have to stop him. That's okay. But it's a very difficult thing. It's partly grown up in the peace movement. Using hatred as a forward momentum can be incredibly dangerous, but using anger for a forward momentum can be incredibly effective, and it's a careful balance. On the ID card stuff, I have a terrible problem with this. I'm an in-between generation. So I was a generation who came from the no privacy, big important thing. And yet the generation behind me doesn't get it. They don't understand privacy because of social media. And I recognise that. So we're 2/3 of the way through the process to adopt a child. And in one of the sessions, we were given the advice, adopted children, you shouldn't really put their photographs on the internet because it can cause, it make it easy for troublesome birth parents to track them down. And I just said to the women, that's just the most infeasible piece of advice you've given in this whole process. To tell a modern child that they can't go on Facebook, to tell a modern granny that they can't see their child in Facebook. And this shift in our understanding and our sense of what our data is and how we use it is we're in the middle of that change now. And I get caught with this because I look at that debate and yes, I'll tell you, two things happened as far as I can tell today. Willie Rennie said something relevant and an infinite number of monkeys using an infinite number of typewriters did indeed write the entire works of Shakespeare. But focusing on the first of those, Willie Rennie is absolutely right. That needs to be primary legislation, needs proper scrutiny, and if we make these big changes, we need to do it like that. But, on the other hand, I have got to say that in this modern world of data, we're going to have to come up with some way of managing that volume of data. There's so much of it that we're going to have to find some way to do it. And the problem is, I think that we're at the very start of this. And my worry is that they're driving in with another database, which is driven by civil servants who love tagging numbers onto you. Civil servants would tattoo a number on every one of you if they could get away with it. That's got to be watched, but I think we're going to have to come up with a big answer to that. And on your question on a public debt audit, I've not been talking about this at all tonight, but there's two things which I think we need to do. One is getting the domestic agenda, getting things moving in Scotland in the right direction, and that's what Commonweal's put all its effort into. There's another thing which we need to do, which is get ready for that next referendum. I'm going to say this. I say this with a depressing regularity. The clock is ticking. We are running out of time now. Now, people who say that, I say that to people and say, what are you talking about? I reckon a really solid bulletproof currency proposal. We cannot go into another referendum without a proper currency proposal. I think a really bulletproof currency proposal will take 2 to 3 years to produce. And bluntly, as a strategist, I would want at least 2 to 3 years to let that gradually seep into the public consciousness before we kick off the 6 months, which I think the next referendum will be, the 6 months of that referendum. That's now. We need to start with that now. And that's a whole range of other series of things that we want to do. A debt audit is exactly something we need to do because we need to come up with a much better narrative on the division of UK debt in the event of Scottish independence. The vague stuff about we'll take our share if you're nice was another one of those. I bet it sounded plausible when they gamed it in the prep sessions, and then they brought it out into the real world and it didn't work. And that's what we need to do. So my argument in that one is that we can't do everything with Commonweal. That debt audit has got to be part of something that the independence movement as a whole picks up and carries through now. And I'm hoping that the impetus for doing that will be a reinvigorated Scottish Independence Convention, which has offered, if all the yes groups would like it to be that, to become an organising forum. Yes Scotland disappeared like a puff of smoke, which wasn't all that heartbreaking, but it left a big hole in the centre There's nothing which is a coordinating mechanism now. The SNP is away fighting elections. We need a coordinating mechanism, and what you talk about is precisely what that coordinating mechanism should be sorting out. A big debt audit, a proper proposal for regulation of banks, how we're going to deal with capital outflow in the event of moving to Scottish currency. That whole range of things. We need really solid answers, and it's later than you think already.
Thanks. If I could take 3 questions from the back now, and then when those 3 are finished, the mic can make its way down to the front for the next batch, okay?
Hello, I'm Bill, and I guarantee my question is going to be shorter than Robin's answer. Right. I, unlike Robin, am part of an older generation. I pick up my state pension, should I live that long, in 2 months' time. And I have been through vagaries of the left. In the 60s, from the YCL to the IMG with Tariq to the SWP to everything. I have seen the left destroy itself, both in Scotland and in the UK. And the radical independence campaign brought joy to my heart. It brought a new vision. It gave me, at my not quite so tender years, hope for the future and for my grandchildren's future. The question I want to ask is that, given all our history, I myself, for the very first time in my life, in this Westminster election, will be voting SNP to not just keep the Tories out, but try and keep Labour out. Come next year's Holyrood elections, the question I have, do we think the left can be big enough to put aside its petty squabbles, to actually decide that the best answer, maybe not the perfect answer, and I'm not a member, is to vote Green? Because if we can vote Green and get a very substantial Green presence, that gives us a platform to move on from and look for things in the future. So is that a viable tactic, or am I being over-optimistic?
Hello, my name is John. I've been living here 38 years, and I've been studying what's been happening in Scotland for the last while. I think it's very interesting that in the referendum we seem to have people from all backgrounds, from all cultures, from all political hues, and yet it's only taken us 6 months to revert to type. We'd think that only the left is possible, and only the left care. And that's simply not true. We've got to somehow to change politics. We have to forget about class. I have been here 38 years, and one of the most divisive things in our society is this class warfare that goes on. Stop doing it. Be as Gore Vidal said, be on the side of the people for once. Not left, not right, on the side of the people. The Common Weal can do something about that. It can bring people together. It can tell people on the left, yes, you care, and you should care. It can tell people from the right, yes, you care also, and you should care. This is about first of us all, and will Common Weal please come out and champion that cause? All of us first. Not some of us, all of us.
Is there one more up near the mic now? Thanks, Jamie. Okay, after.
Hi, I'm a Greek, so I'll just say a couple of things and then ask a question. What happened actually with Syriza, Tariq, you briefly mentioned it, that they went back and they lied to the people after the Eurogroup meetings. Of course they would lie to the people. Of course they would do that, because they never prepared the working class in the unions for what would happen if they negotiated for the people. So that was a normal consequence, in my opinion. This is what would happen. And as a Syriza representative during the previous Commonweal, like a couple of weeks, 3 weeks ago, talk, said Syriza, before the elections, did not have much influence in the trade unions. They did not have much influence in the working class. So the people voted for them because they wanted to rely on someone to take them out of the humanitarian crisis. But this is not how it works, because you've got the beasts in front of you, and you need to fight against them. You can't just gather around the squares and support a prime minister and a minister of economy to fight for you. You need to fight every day at your union. You need to reform your union. And my question is, when about SNP and the days that are going to follow, in order to and I disagree with the previous speaker, I believe that there is a class war, there is a class fight, because someone that is rich and is quite good, you would never change society. What I wanted to ask is the way to reform society and the way to do stuff for the left and for the people and et cetera, is to reform the trade unions. And how are we going to do that? Because us as well, we work here and we're willing to do that. Most of the people here do not know that they belong in a trade union or that they would do something through a trade union. How are we going to do that? This should be the basis of a new society.
Thank you.
Basically, three questions have been posed. The first one was, why don't we, we've got the Greens, and why don't we all just vote for them and not bother with too much else? And just to show that, what my own position is, that in London, in the area where I live, come the next election, the only socialist candidate or proto-socialist is a Green candidate, someone I've known for a long time who's been an active trade unionist, active anti-war. He is the Green candidate, and all the other candidates are effectively extreme center candidates, so I will vote for him. But when we discuss, it's not a problem. But in Scotland, we have a situation where there has been a long and active socialist tradition. And that is not disappearing, by the way. It comes out in different ways, and many of their people mobilize, as has been said 100 times by the Radical Independence Campaign, fall into that or related categories. People who wanted something else, some other outfit, some other umbrella, through which they could fight for independence, and that was extremely important, both for the SNP and for Scotland, that actually happened, and it wasn't left to the SNP alone for a variety of reasons. Now, in my opinion, what we need effectively is an umbrella organization of the left, which should include the Greens if they're willing to participate and join. I would be very strongly in favor of that, to create a view that fights for an alternative vision of Scotland once the Westminster elections are over, including many of the things that have been said here today by Robin. Now, many people in the SNP, by the way, will agree with that. So it's not even a question of being hostile to them. It's a question of creating a pole of social attraction that will hopefully attract lots of people. And that, I think, can only be done if you have some political organization of a new type, not the old type. That's the first point. The second point, to the question at the back, which I, with great respect, I hear this often, that let's ignore class. But there's a problem, that the capitalist class not only exists, but is stronger now than it has ever been, because the opposition has faded away. I mean, the whole campaigns, even the sort of spontaneous campaigns of the occupation people, 1% versus us. The 1% or the 2% or the 3% effectively run society. Class polarities on a global scale are increasing, not decreasing. The last Prime Minister of Britain under whose rule there was actually a small redistribution of wealth in favor of the less well-off was Harold Wilson. He was bad on many things. On that, they were reasonable. They did tax, and they did, the statistics show it. But that was already a very long time ago. Now that idea has completely gone out of politics, redistribution. And that is what the movements are trying to revive. Because it's interesting that basically all the demands in South America, in Greece, in Spain, in Scotland, are effectively demands which the Attlee government wouldn't at all have found that radical because they were implementing them. And the one thing, the whole evolution of the capitalist system did, it didn't only wipe out communism, it also wiped out social democracy. So you had both the social dictatorships of Eastern Europe and the social democracies of Western Europe made redundant. That is the problem. And so what we are starting off doing again is saying that many of these ideas of regulating capital, of taxing the rich, were not wrong. And that in itself creates a debate today. So for that reason alone, we cannot give up on class. To the friend who asked about Syriza, you get it wrong if you think Syriza didn't have working class support. If you said that, they had huge working class support. And the support drained away from the KKA, the hardcore Stalinist party in Greece, which used to dominate many of the trades unions, but which saw their votes really drop very drastically, despite the fact that the Syriza leadership appealed to the KKE, to Antarsia, to other groups on the left, come and join us. There will be more of us, we will strengthen the left. They refused to come and took up an extremely sectarian attitude. And they paid the price for that sectarianism electorally. The problem with Syriza is not that they don't have strong working class support. They do, and not just the working class, but society, many other sectors of society, which feel one thing about these new politicians, that they're not corrupt, that they are not in there to line their own pockets, as politicians tend to do. So we hope, and you know, I know these leaders quite well, I hope very strongly that they will do what they should have done before, which is a plan B on the issue of a currency. Even a mild social democrat, Wolfgang Munkau, columnist in the Financial Times, pleaded with Syriza, don't cave in to the Germans, please don't do it. Instead, develop your own currency internally, which you use internally, and deal with them. And for foreign trade, you can still deal with the euro, but break the stranglehold. And I think they will have to do that, because the Eurozone as it exists is really, even on its own terms, very difficult to maintain as it is. So we're in a transition stage with new parties, new groups emerging, and trying now to search for alternatives and breaking that dictatorship of the EU neoliberals.
I'll just whip through a couple of those. Bill, I agree. All I can say is I used to have a rugby coach who wasn't into big strategies on boards and used to say the game's played in front of you. I'll tell you the strategies for 2016 once we get through 2015. I don't know what it'll be. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know how the first election is going to be. What I do absolutely agree is we've got to be really clever. it would be stupid if we went out there and allowed the electoral system to work against us when we know that's there to happen. If the SNP clean up and first past the post, we need to persuade them to get involved in a collective strategy for second votes. We've got to work out how we do that, and it's for sure. On the second question, this is the one that I've had more arguments with people over than anything else, is class or not class. So let me just very, very briefly put my position in this one. Economic class position is still the most important driving factor on most of the problems that we have in society. That is at the heart of it. The economic class is there. But, and this is the but, because I'm broadly agreeing with you, you don't have to give up on that analysis when you're forming your political views to say, but if that language and narrative isn't reaching out to a wider group of the population, it's not working. Now, that is on the nose what we try to do with Common Weal. Our policy proposals, our policy platform, our analysis of things is built on a class analysis. It is a class analysis. It is to do with power relations in society. But it also comes from the fact that we've been shouting class, class, class at an electorate for decades, and they've not been listening. So we're just going to keep shouting it a bit more? No, we've got to find, my view is, and I've described this as trying to draw as a circle that's small enough that it really means something, but big enough that we can get the maximum number of people in it. And I'll give you one example of that. If you look at the small business sector in Scotland, they have been screwed over not much better than a lot of benefits claimants. The small business sector in this country has been devastated by corporatism. That is a group we should be bringing on board. We should be making the plight of the small business and the plight of the welfare claimant the same thing. And it is the plight of the same thing. It's global corporate capitalism doing whatever it wants to whomever it wants for whatever purpose. The more people we can assemble in a coalition, the better. If we need to use different language to do that, we should do it. That's where all of us first came from. Nobody knows what neoliberal means. Or more specifically, if you know what neoliberal means, you've already made your mind up. If that's a word you use, we need another word. And that's why we used me first politics versus all of us first politics. And it works. And it is significant. I've been talking to Compass. And really interesting things happening with Compass, which was a Labour think tank, and now is not a Labour think tank. They've smelt what's happening. And they were talking about, is beyond right and left the way to go? And I said, no, Blair killed that. Don't touch it. It's toxic. People don't believe it. But what you can say is, think like a Venn diagram. The abuse of the elite has become so big that the anger of the left and the anger of the right has grown so much there's a giant intersection. So the right are as angry, conservatives, small c conservative voters, are as angry with energy companies as the left are. They're as angry with the trains as the left are. So let's find that common ground. Not us in Scotland. That's what I was suggesting they do in London. Find that common ground, because there's a lot of people in there. They're all annoyed at the abuse of democracy. So there's more common ground. Find out how much common ground you can produce and make a narrative. Now, that's what I was suggesting in England. We've gone beyond that, but yes, that's what we've got to do. Take this politics, describe it in a way that resonates with people, and never, and I cannot say this enough, never let yourself off the hook because you had the conversation and you didn't persuade someone. You can't just go, the system. No. You've got to be better. If you can't persuade enough people to follow you, you've got to be better. And that's what I think we have to do. And on the trade union front, the question about the trade unions, incidentally, I've got a half-sister who's lived in Greece for 20 years. She's married to a Greek family. I've got lots of Greek relatives over there. The rise and development of Syriza is amazing for me. Watching my, whatever it is, Greek mother-in-law moving from being a very strong social conservative to a Syriza voter, I think is been an absolute education for me personally, and I've found it really interesting. On the trade unions here, I've had this conversation so many times. When are the trade unions going to rescue the Labour Party? To which I say, yeah, great. Who's going to rescue the trade unions? Because, and I don't mean this in a bad way, I'm a big, big fan of the trade unions, and I think the trade unions are packed with really, really good people. It's just that for a whole bunch of reasons, legislative, behavioural, relationship with the Labour Party, they have basically turned into legal services organisations. They don't really campaign. They do a bit, but they don't really campaign in the big political issues, as long as, just in case it gets in the way of Labour. They don't really do that now. They represent members. The way they represent members is so essential that I'll never talk down the trade unions. They must do that. But whether they are necessarily entities which are desirous of changing society anymore, I'm not sure. That's for them to answer. And those of you in trade unions, fix it. I'll just point out, someone earlier, I think Tariq said earlier on that there were more trade unionists in the SNP than the Labour Party. There are more members of the SNP trade union group than there are members of the Scottish Labour Party by a factor of 2. So let's not forget that things have changed very substantially. However, my guess is that all of the old institutions of Scotland, almost all of the old institutions of Scotland, the media, the voluntary sector, the civic sector, the trade union sector, all of them went through a referendum campaign there where they abdicated their responsibility, and I don't know they can get it back. The churches sat down. The charities sat down. The media jumped all over us. The trade unions sat down. So we had to get on our feet. We had to arm ourselves with whatever we could, and we had to fight that fight on our own. And when it finished, I was at a meeting, and it was one of these civic meetings, 20, 30 people around a table, a Scottish government organised thing. And I was like, wow, forgot you but you. I haven't seen you for 3 years. What were you all doing? And there was this sheepish sense around the room. What do we do now as institutions? Because they didn't need us anymore. And that's one of the things that I think may have changed, is I don't think it's going to be the institutions that's going to save us. I think it's going to be us. And I think that we are going to have to get back out in the fields and keep the fight going, because there are no citadels for us to take anymore. There are no high ground that we can just invade, inhabit, and that'll be us won. We're going to have to fight it much more guerrilla all the way through. I hope the trade unions can become relevant again, and also I'm just going to say this, anyone that thinks the SDUC is currently close to the Labour Party isn't following what's going on. The tensions are snapping all over the place. People you would not believe have left the Labour Party. I'm not going to say it in the recording, but really, really significant shift in the trade union movement away from the Labour Party. But I'm not holding my breath. We're going to have to do this ourselves, and I ain't looking over my shoulder waiting for anybody coming along on a white steed. We're going to be doing this ourselves, or we're not going to be doing it.
Just 60 seconds worth of thoughts about the questions. We've seen some amazing class fighters over the last number of years. George Osborne, David Cameron. In fact, the whole of the establishment. The problem with this argument is that you actually can't ignore the fact that a class war is going on right now. What else is benefit sanctions or workfare or any of these sorts of things? I mean, this is the situation we live in. There is, however, an important point. I mean, something which I think that we've learned over the last couple of years is that often the way the left has promoted itself is oppositional, is that we are the ones always looking for a fight and all that sort of thing. Actually, I think there is merit in saying we have to be the ones actually proposing an agenda. I mean, for so long the left has operated really without an agenda, apart from to say we need a general strike or we need part of the work of the independence movement has actually been to develop that agenda. So we've actually got something workable to say to people. That is what Syriza actually did. I asked loads and loads of activists this sort of question, and all of them said we promoted ourselves not as a party of protest, but as a party that was serious about what it would do with power. And that's really that's maturity, I think. That's where we need to get to as a movement. Now, to be honest with you, I think we're so far ahead of where we might have been because of so many people have come together. You look at the papers that have been written on whether it's housing or the environment. I mean, we are in a good situation just now. We just have to work out exactly how we get these ideas into the corridors of power. And on that there's a debate, but we're getting to a better place. And, the last point I just wanted to touch on is the trade unions. First of all, just back up completely what Robin was saying there about the STUC. I mean, the situation just now in terms of membership with the Labour Party is already been spelled out. But more than that, you're seeing a situation where there's going to be a huge influx of people, if they can get organised into the trade unions, which changes the nature of the relationship between the trade unions and the Labour leadership. But they have to get organised. That's really the problem we face. We actually have to have a situation where all of those people radicalised by the independence movement who are joining, who are trade union members, have the capacity and the framework to actually push an agenda inside the trade unions. And that's really my last point about the unions. To be honest with you, in the 1970s, the best trade unionists were developed inside the mass workplace where they were leading occupations, strikes and work-ins. But now it's not the case. Now the workplace is atomised. Now the trade unions in the private sector, I think, are about 6%. Therefore, the way to reintroduce trade unionism into the culture of working class people's lives in terms of it being an organisation is to start with the political radicalisation. It's to start with the social movement, the independence movement, the anti-war movement, the anti-cuts movement, all of these sorts of things. Start with the political ideas and then marry that to the question of political organisation inside a trade union. That's the only way we're going to revitalise the trade union movement. And again, we're in a good place because we do have a social movement. We do have the possibility of discussing these things in forums like this, which I'll just end on saying. The discussion here tonight, I think, has been absolutely amazing. I mean, there has been debate, there has been big political ideas discussed, but there's also been really concrete things discussed. I mean, as well, and you know, if this is the sort of thing that we can continue to do right at the length and breadth of Scotland, we are going to be in a seriously strong position. Seriously strong, not just in terms of 2016, but going on to another referendum. It's a hugely positive event.
I'm afraid we've run out of time, so that was a fantastic way to end. Thank you very much, Jonathan.